Raleigh Community Committee meeting. We are going to start today's meeting with rezoning Z5320. This has been in committee now, work on the issues that were raised last time. So I'm going to ask the applicant to update us on where we are. I believe that would be Jamie.
Good morning, Mayor Baldwin, Jamie Schwadler with Parker Poe at 301 Fayetteville Street. I believe staff might have had an update they might want to start with. We're happy to follow staff or give our own update, but we do have a presentation in any event.
Okay, let's start with staff then. And I believe, is it Travis who will be leading this?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you and good morning. So I just have a very light touch for you, realizing that the applicants probably are owning much of this information, just to essentially reset the timeline of events here for you. As the mayor mentioned, this case has been in front of council for some time. So this was presented at public hearing back in June. Public hearing was closed and there was a deadline to modify zoning conditions as of July 1. So the applicant did offer some new zoning conditions by that date, which are included within your backup material. And you went over those at your last committee meeting. Additionally, the committee asked the applicant and staff to have a follow-up meeting with residents to discuss some topics that were raised at the committee meeting last, and I understand that has occurred, and the applicants can provide an update on that. And they also have produced some additional information. I know that there's a PowerPoint presentation the applicants might like to go through and some additional graphics they might like to show, so I can take care of that for them if they would like to show those. And I'm happy to answer any questions that the committee members might have.
Okay, do we have any questions for Travis at this time? Okay, then we will continue on with Jamie.
Thank you, Mayor Baldwin. Travis, if you wouldn't mind loading that PowerPoint, we'll run through that update. And I appreciate orienting the committee as to where this case has been. It was filed in October of last year, and the public hearing was closed June 1st, and then went to committee for the first time June 22nd. So following that committee meeting, we did meet on site with the neighbors on June 28th, 3 months ago. And that was in order to try to update the conditions before they became final. We did go through those conditions, and if Travis, you'll advance the next slide, I think we narrowed down to these two issues based on the concerns that the neighbors raised and the follow-up information that was requested from the committee. This says action items from June, but it was actually from September. And those two issues is that the neighbors requested more information about the renderings, more information about retaining walls and renderings showing any proposed retaining walls and the extent of those walls. And I'd just like to remind the committee that we discussed those retaining walls at the June 28th in-person meeting. And there was a comment that those weren't discussed before. Those were not anticipated with the original zoning request, but were made necessary because we accommodated the neighbor's request to push the buildings back 150 feet from the northern property line. Once we did that, it impacted our ability to offer structured parking. So any surface parking would have to be accommodated with a portion of retaining walls, and we'll show a little bit more detail about that today in the renderings we provided to the neighbors. The second issue was there was a discussion on Fillcrest Road and whether that could be improved by the city. And I believe we landed on a request of whether the applicant would discuss with the adjacent property owners along Fillcrest whether they would voluntarily annex their property to facilitate that improvement, because that couldn't be forced by the city. It would have to be voluntarily offered by those property owners. And just again, to orient, we'll show a slide of this, but 5 out of the 6 properties that would be required to be annexed to improve the section of Fillcrest Road we're talking about are not subject to the zoning request. We have 1 parcel on there, 5 additional ones, and 4 out of the 6 properties are owned by unrelated parties. So our owner owns 1 and an adjacent, but the remainder are not under our control. So this slide shows the map of where the cut and fill we believe would occur. Now, keep in mind, this is done, this is taking the layout that we have shown previously and estimating where the cut and fill would occur based on what we believe would be accurate in this situation. Of course, a full grading plan would be done at site plan if this case were to be approved. But based on the existing topo and where we believe that would happen, the red bold line that you see kind of coming to the left side of the surface parking lot and wrapping around the top portion would be where we envision the retaining wall would need to go. But you'll see that there's different colors that indicate cut, which is cutting into the side of the hill, and fill, which is exposed retaining wall. And so if you look at those numbers, what that means is starting at the bottom of the page, approximate wall height 13 feet cut towards Lead Mine Road, means that if you were standing in that parking lot facing north to Inman Park, you would see the face of the retaining wall, and the top of the retaining wall would be above you. If you were standing on the opposite side of that wall in Inman Park, looking back toward the subject property, you would just see the top of the retaining wall and perhaps the parking lot behind. And that condition would continue everywhere you see cut as you go further toward the middle of the screen. We're traveling from west on Lead Mine Road to east toward the eastern property line. And so the approximate area where we believe it would level out, where you would have the retaining wall kind of meet the existing grade, would be between the area where it says approximate wall height 3 feet fill, shown in red, and approximate wall height 4 feet cut. So everything from that point to Lead Mine Road would be a condition where the retaining wall would really only be visible if you were standing in the parking lot looking to the north to Inman Park. It wouldn't be tremendously visible from Inman Park looking south because we're in that cut situation. Once you hit that level spot and go further to the east, which is the top of screen here, that's when we're in a fill situation. And so you can see on the screen, we've tried to highlight those areas as red, 3 feet fill. The next dot at the corner is about 11 feet fill and 12 feet fill. Again, these are estimates. But I guess the significance there is that there was some concern expressed of whether there would be this huge retaining wall seen all along in the property lines from Inman Park. We do not believe that's the case, and we don't believe that's possible given the grading that's necessary from Lead Mine Road down to the opposite end of the parking lot. We'd also note that we added a condition, and I'll go into that in just a little bit, that agreed to screening the top of the retaining wall, because at the June 28th meeting, there was a concern raised about if we had surface parking and a retaining wall, would citizens see lights? So we agreed to an opaque screening, and that became part of our final conditions that were submitted July 1st. If you'll go to the next slide. So these are the updated renderings that show what portions of the retaining wall you'd likely see. And we stuck with the original renderings that were done for consistency so that it was clear we were adding to the renderings we showed in the committee before. And in that top left section, number 4, that's the view you would likely have if you were standing in Inman Park looking south toward the subject property. The tan area is the massing of the building, and the gray that you see just along the edge of the tree line underneath is where you'd see the approximate location of the retaining wall. So this is a good representation toward the right of that picture. That's where you're not really seeing much of anything because you're looking at the top of the wall. The person in back of the wall would be looking at the face if they were facing you. But right where the arrow is saying approximate retaining wall location height towards the center of that picture is where the height of the wall would start to be a little bit more visible from the Inman Park side based on that cut and fill estimates that we provided. Still, you're looking through the existing vegetation in Inman Park, plus the buffer that we've committed to on the property line and potential TCA area that we've committed to that are parts of this case. So we're trying to do a good representation to show where those heights of the retaining wall would be, but we believe that they'd be largely screened by the vegetation that's there today and that we're committing to on our side of the property. The next picture down, number 3, is taken from a little bit further east in the Inman Park area, kind of looking back at the northeast corner of the building. And again, the retaining wall is pointed out because it's barely visible, but you can see the massing of the building and the retaining wall by comparison. The view from Fillcrest Road looking west doesn't really show any retaining wall because the height of Fillcrest, the grade of Fillcrest is so much higher than the rest of the sites. We don't believe anything would be visible there. And then from Lead Mine Road looking east, excuse me, number 2 was from Lead Mine or from Fillcrest looking west from the neighboring property owner into the existing vegetation and through the transition yard. So again, you're having a lot of areas screened. View 5 is actually from Lead Mine looking east. And again, the grade drops off quite a bit. So you're not going to be able to see much of the retaining walls. You would see some of the upper floors of the building based on how much higher Lead Mine is than the rest of the subject site. And so that plan below kind of shows you the perspectives of looking from Lead Mine, looking from 1724 Wysong, looking from 1744 Wysong, and then looking from Fillcrest, and kind of points out where we think the approximate areas of the cut soils shown in the red area, again, below grade when you're looking from Inman Park and Wysong Court, and then the areas of fill, which are in that northeast corner. If you recall from the prior committee meetings, this northeast corner has been an area where we've increased the commitments throughout the case, and even up until the final days before the conditions become final. We had the committee meeting on the 22nd. We met with the neighbors on site the 28th and then added conditions for that northeast corner in terms of screening and such before they became final on July 1st. If you'll go to the next slide, Travis. And so these are just a refresher of what those final conditions were. The track changes you see are the changes between when this left the committee meeting on the 22nd and what we added before the conditions became final on July 1st. And just a reminder, they became final by operation of the code. So we did not have ability to modify them after July 1st. That was explained in the June 22nd meeting and understood when we went to the meeting with the neighbors on the 28th. But that bottom of the screen, condition number 8, shows the addition that we made based on that meeting. Any surface parking located within 150 feet of the northern parcels that is also located above a retaining wall shall include the 3-foot 6-inch opaque screening along the northern and eastern edges of the lot on top of the retaining wall. That was added specifically to alleviate any concerns of headlights coming down off of Lead Mine Road and shining to the north or east. Next slide, please. And then these additional conditions were added and discussed at length at the previous meeting with respect to the transit easement, refusal to, or the acknowledgement that we wouldn't make a connection to the sewer through the Wysong Court area, and then contribution toward the traffic signal if warranted. So those are just a summary of what those improvements were. I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Avi Graywall to talk about his efforts with respect to contacting the additional property owners along Fillcrest Drive for purposes of voluntary annexation. And then we're happy to answer any additional questions that the committee might have. If you go to the next slide, please, Travis.
Good morning, everybody. This is Avi Graywall with Sing Development, 2601 Suite 203 Weston Parkway, Cary, North Carolina, 27513. Thanks, Jamie, for the handoff there. Yeah, as Jamie mentioned, we've been working with the property owners further down Fillcrest and across the street from us on Fillcrest to see if there's a willingness for them to be annexed in the city of Raleigh. There's 4 property owners. We're able to touch base with 3 of them in the last couple of weeks. One of them being Mr. Curran, which is directly east of our property. He expressed a willingness to be annexed by the city of Raleigh. And then across Fillcrest from us, I might butcher their name, but the Stack Lefts, which they also front Lead Mine Road as well. There's a willingness from them to be annexed by the city of Raleigh. However, the Pollocks, which are just behind them, they expressed that they do not want to be annexed by the city of Raleigh right now. Maybe somewhere in the future they mentioned, but today they do not want to be. And then the Troxlers, who are east of the Currens, off Memorial Drive there, we were not able to get a hold of them. We've sent them letters, but have not been able to touch base with them yet. And beyond that, I'm happy to answer any other further questions regarding this case, regarding these, reaching out to the neighbors here. However, after, the last meeting, Councilmember Cox, you mentioned, that you guys would be ready to make a recommendation after this meeting. So we're looking forward to that.
And this is Jamie Schwedler. Just to summarize, each of these property owners were contacted.
Yep.
It's just that several of them indicated a willingness. At least one indicated they were not willing, and there was no response from the remaining owners.
Okay, I'm going to open this for questions, and then I'm going to ask who is on the line who would like to speak. So Councilmember Cox.
It's a question for the city attorney. If the properties on Fillcrest were annexed and the road was improved, would those property owners be assessed with the improvement?
If they were voluntarily, they would have to ask to be voluntarily annexed. And
Right.
at that point, they would have to pay all the regular city taxes that come with an annexation. So I can't tell you exactly what all of those are beside property taxes right now, but they would be like anybody else in the city.
But would they be assessed for the road improvements?
Not to my knowledge. I don't think that we would assess them. But I mean, I have to look at it a little closer. I don't know any authority. Generally, when we annex it, we make the road improvements.
Yeah, I think that would need to be clarified and because I don't know if property owners understand where they would be in terms of any assessments for curb and gutter and sidewalk and so forth as part of an annexation.
Travis, do you know the answer to that?
I don't know the answer off the top of my head. It's a better question for Department of Transportation. I can see if I can chase down that answer for you.
If I may, though, my understanding of the Pollock's refusal didn't, and Mr. Graywell, I'd invite you to clarify this, was more of the concept of being a voluntarily annexing. Is that correct? So they didn't express a misunderstanding about whether they'd have to pay for the road?
No, they just, they just kind of flat out said that at the moment they're not interested in being annexed by the city of Raleigh.
Okay, thank you. But I think there's some uncertainty about who understands what about any assessments for road improvements.
Oh yeah, there was no questions with regard to that.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Any additional questions from the committee? Councilmember Cox.
Yeah, it's still not clear, even though we've seen a few renderings from Wysong, exactly what the elevations would look like. I know I went out there last weekend. I took a look myself. It's unclear to me how high above the neighboring properties the parking lot would eventually sit. It's unclear to me how high above the retaining wall and the screening the parking lot lights would be. And even though those are cutoffs, it seems to me that depending on the height of the parking lot lights, the spillage of light onto being reflected off the building, for example, and from the building itself onto the neighboring properties could be significant. And I don't see whether any conditions that really address the lighting other than the standard cutoff. The other thing that I have a concern about from my visit is Philcrest Drive, assuming that that improvement to Philcrest is not something that would happen for a number of years. I am very concerned about additional traffic. I drove down Philcrest myself, and with oncoming cars, I practically had to get off the right side of the road in order to get through. And there are no conditions that prohibit traffic from the proposed development on the Philcrest. And for me, that's a very, very big concern.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any other questions for the applicant? Travis?
Yes, ma'am. Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to answer the question. So I reached out to Department of Transportation staff, and they indicated that non-developer parcels would not be assessed for roadway improvements if they were voluntarily annexed. So obviously a development parcel would have to improve right of way, but the non-developer properties that are being annexed are not assessed.
Okay, thank you for finding that out so promptly. Okay, next I'm going to ask, let's see, Alan, we have a number of people on the line. Could we just bring them on one by one?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and just if you will name who is speaking first, that would be helpful.
Yes, ma'am. We have a question from Angie Brad. Angie, you are unmuted, and you are now unmuted, Angie, and you can speak.
Oh, yeah. My question was in the chat. It was just about when we were talking about annexation and the costs for that. And I think I sent to a couple different of you in there that the Pollocks reached out to me after hearing from the applicant about annexation, and were very concerned about the costs that would be bringing their home up to standards for connecting to the water, et cetera. So I was just wanting to put that out there, that I had at least heard from them that they had those concerns.
Okay. The next individual is April Gross, and April, you're unmuted. You can speak, please. Hi, if you. Hey, April, are you there? Okay, we'll come back to April. The next individual we heard from was Prior Gibson, and let me locate Prior Gibson. All right, we are. And Prior, you are now unmuted.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Mayor, councilors, staff, thank you so much for letting these neighborhoods participate in these meetings. It's added a lot of value, and not just us worrying about this project, but appreciation for what you guys do as city council. Plainly speaking, Mayor, my part of our neighborhood steerco is very direct. I have just two quick notes. We thank the applicant for the memorandum of 922 that was shown on the PowerPoint just a moment ago, and also the memo of 924 that I assume staff has, that actually provided us for the first time in the months of in many meetings of actual elevations that the applicant is planning to use, which helped answer some of the questions we have. But Mayor, where we are today after months of meetings and everybody really trying to be constructive is what Councilor Cox mentioned just a minute ago. We still don't know what these folks are planning to build. They have provided us with a computer generated illustration that's a little, I say at best, ambitious, that shows trees that aren't there, and a perspective, quite frankly, that shows no houses anywhere in the neighborhood on the elevation side. And I completely understand the applicant not being able to have a drawing that's architecturally significant. But I think at this stage where we're trying to figure out what's going on so that the neighborhoods can comment constructively, I think we're past time knowing and being told, or at least basically shown, what the building's going to look like and how tall it's going to be and what it's going to look like when you go out the backyard. Are you going to be able to see the sunshine? And I will yield. That's the only comment I have. There'll be other folks having much smarter comments than me, but I would yield to what I heard the applicant Jamie say just a moment ago when she showed the elevation in the PowerPoint, and she correctly said it's not possible to change things the way they're laid out currently. And she's exactly right. That's what this community has been insisting since we started, which this site is topographically challenged. And this project is just too ambitious for this site and the size and density that they are proposing. We are trying to be a good neighborhood, Mayor. We're trying to embrace the need for density, the middle housing that we know we have to provide in Raleigh, and we are not being anti-development. We're just saying, let's make sure everybody wins something in this project. Thank you, Mayor, and I yield to others in our steer code.
Okay, thank you.
The next individual is Kevin Gard. Kevin, you are unmuted.
Okay, thank you. Kevin Gard, 1644 Standard Trail. Thank you, Madam Mayor and councilors, for this time to talk. As was sort of mentioned earlier, light spillage from the site's been a community concern from the very first community meeting onward. And conditions were added back in March to address lighting from structured parking. The developer's plans changed from surface parking to mostly surface parking back in June. And the details weren't made clear in time to understand how the lighting conditions should be updated to address the neighbors' concern about light spillage when their homes are well below the lights in the parking lot. There were conditions added to add screening for cars that are coming in. That was the very first concern that we had. But the issues about the lighting in the parking lot being high above the neighbors came later. The UDO limits the parking lot lighting height from 15 feet to 30 feet high, depending on the district. Lights at this height place the light source roughly at 25 to 40 feet above the backyards of several of the homes and is above nearly all the backyards for the residents of Wysong Court that run along the Inman Park property line. And this is based upon the drawings that were provided last week, where we could see what the height of the parking lot's going to be at the very eastern edge. And certainly these lighting structures are going to be even higher as they progress up the grade towards Lead Mine Road. So and we've looked at the UDO rules. The full cutoff descriptions for shielding lighting don't seem to address the specific issue of lighting that's coming directly from underneath. These homes and backyards, back windows of houses will be below the light. So we don't understand how they might be shielded in such a way to address this concern. So the neighbors, after seeing this, are not happy again that there's yet another technical detail that has a long-term impact on the neighbors, but it hasn't been addressed with conditions. I thank you and yield to the others.
Okay.
The next individual to speak is April Gross. April, you're unmuted.
Thank you so much. And thank you for being patient with the technology. Went back to old school phone. So thanks for the opportunity to speak. I guess the first thing I would say is there's close to 1,500 citizens in neighborhoods directly adjoining this site. And after a year of work, there's still, what strikes me, there's still no substantial support for the project for a lot of reasons that you'll hear from the group about. But this is really despite the fact that we are in support of increased density and development of the site. I do believe the city of Raleigh can do better than this. I think as our elected officials, we're asking you to help us do better. There's a huge need here for missing middle housing, which we would really welcome. After a year of dedicated work from my perspective, in addition to not understanding, what the building height would be and all the challenges around lighting and being underneath of these lights potentially, there's still no clear plan of what the traffic light would be. And I understand it is related to the state, but no clear plan in an area where it's really failing. We had 99 crashes in this area in just 1 year. It's a regular occurrence, and we still are in fear when we leave our neighborhood. And then the conditions really not understanding and not being protective of our neighborhood, not being given ample time by the applicant to really understand what their plans are and have conditions that could properly protect our neighborhoods, not only, living here, but also our safety and our quality of life. So please take these into consideration. Thank you so much.
Next.
The next individual to speak will be Mr. Easley, and trying to locate him right now. Oh, Matthew, Mr. Easley, you are now unmuted. You're now unmuted, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mayor and committee members. I'm not certain that Angie Brandt had a chance to say everything she wanted to because she was called a little bit out of order. So if you wouldn't mind just checking with her once more in just a moment. But I'd like to back up for just a sec if I can. My impression and understanding from the last meeting was that we'd be having some conversations with city planning staff, in addition to the applicants, about where we are and where we might go next. And I don't think that's happened. I think we probably ought to do that. We'd like to do that as soon as we can. So we just ask for the committee's support in enabling us to talk some more with city planning staff about the issues that my neighbors have raised today and other things that are important to us. We need to have a really clear understanding of the impacts of this project on our surrounding neighborhoods, of course, before we can evaluate it as adequately as we feel we have a responsibility to for our neighbors. So unless I'm mistaken about that, let's please do that before a future meeting of this committee. Thank you.
Can I ask planning staff if any meeting has taken place?
I'm not certain if there's been a meeting between staff and the neighbors specifically. I think Don Belk is on the line. He's our case planner, and he could speak a little bit more directly to that.
Don, can we hear from you?
Yes, Madam Mayor. No, there has been no further meetings scheduled with the neighbors and staff exclusively. Of course, we have participated in previous on-site meetings with the applicant and the neighbors, but I have not been called upon to organize any additional meetings.
Madam Mayor, if I may quickly add to that, this is Pat Young with Planning and Development.
Yes.
Of course, we're very happy to meet with anybody, any neighbors as we have in the past with this set of neighbors. I don't believe there's any additional assurances or information that we have that that's available currently about future impacts that we could represent to. A lot of, as you're well aware, a lot of the details of the site development are done at the administrative site plan stage, and the level of detail that's being requested here is not something we could probably represent to with the conditions that are in effect now. So certainly, again, we'll take any direction you all provide us, but I just wanted to lay that out. Don or Travis, if you want to add to that, please feel free.
Okay, next is next is Angie Brandt.
Thank you. Angie Brandt, 1900 Russell Drive. Madam Mayor, members of council, thank you again for your time today. I really appreciate this platform to bring to light the troubles that this case has brought us. Your time is really appreciated. And I just wanted to say, Madam Mayor, I brushed my hair today in case we had an issue with me being shown on screen again. But as Mr. Crane opened with, this case has been going on for some time. In fact, it's been over a year since our first notice came through about the rezoning case. And as we've kind of already addressed, there's been little movement on some of the key points that were as important to us back in October of 2020 as they are now. The community has worked in good faith to address these concerns for almost a year. The fact remains the project is an albatross for the location. It's too high next to single family homes. It's way too dense. It suffers significantly from inadequate infrastructure with zero conditions for Fieldcrest that would allow us to feel safe coming and going from our neighborhood. And we're in one of the busiest areas of Raleigh. So despite what Ms. Schwedler had alluded to in her June email, the community at large still opposes this case for those reasons, as April has already just said. But we're here today, 355 days after the first neighborhood meeting, posted by the developer because despite our efforts, our best efforts and abundant efforts as citizens, there was no movement with this case until the city demanded it after each and every one of our meetings in front of you. The Planning Commission sent them back to talk to us. City Council sent them back to talk to us. This committee sent them back to talk to us time and time again. Maybe I was naive because I've never gone through this process before, but I believe developers bear some responsibility to work with the community. And this case showed me that the burden of managing and navigating this process has been left to the city. And us average citizens who don't do this for a living, we don't have prior experience or connections, we don't have an attorney to guide us. Mr. Belk just indicated he hadn't been called upon to meet with us since our last meeting with the developer back in June, 3 months ago. I would have had no idea that I needed to reach out to him to navigate this process. We all showed up at the first committee meeting not having any idea of what to expect or who to even reach out to find that information. But that's just beside the point. The bottom line is we have gotten nowhere as citizens until the city stepped in. And I won't venture to guess if it was a strategic move by the developer, if it was just simply, savvy business practices. But as this case is concerned, it's been drawn out, not by a lack of effort on our part as citizen stakeholders. I'm an idealist. I really believe that when we would put our best efforts forward and work together with the developer, we'd garner great results for the city. But this opportunity was squandered. It was an exhaustive misuse of your time and ours, and I think it needs to be looked into. And I appreciate that we're here in this committee to be able to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Who's next?
Ma'am, Mr. Easley said he had a follow-up.
Okay.
You're muted, sir.
Thank you. And thank you, Mayor Baldwin. Yes, just a quick follow-up on my prior question and kind of following up on Angie's comments just now. Of course, this case was referred to the committee to look into some issues we had raised about how this particular case has unfolded. And not sure we've gone through all of that yet, which we certainly hope the committee will do. We also have, of course, as a result of our experience with this case, some thoughts about the city's process in general, how it might be made better in some ways. So these are things we'd like to explore with you. We'd be happy, for example, to put our thoughts in writing the next week or so for your consideration, and just implore you to take that up at a future meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next individual is Molly McBride. May I have a comment? Molly, you unmuted. The next individual is Marty Perry. Marty, you are unmuted.
I signed up to be on the meeting, not to speak.
Could you repeat that? Repeat that comment, sir.
I'm actually in the car right now. I can't speak.
It appears he's in the car and can't speak.
Okay. Liz Tooth.
Hi, I'm just on to listen.
Okay, thank you. And Laura Good.
I don't have anything to add at this time. Thank you.
That's all that we have for right now, Mayor.
Okay, I'm going to ask the applicant to respond to what the neighbors have expressed as concerns.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Jamie Schwegler with Parker Poe. First of all, thank you, neighbors, for continuing to participate in this discussion. I think we understand that there aren't trained professionals in the neighborhood, but we do appreciate their active participation throughout this case, because what it's done is given us a very clear picture of what they requested as we went into each of these meetings, and we responded. We responded with concrete conditions that address those concerns that were expressed to us. For example, the fact that the full cutoff for the light fixture spillage was a concern we addressed with condition number 8, which dealt with full cutoff and screening of any structured parking decks. The conditions that are on your screen are substantial, and they've been a product of what conditional zoning is designed to do, which is to listen to those concerns and offer conditions that we believe would mitigate those sincerely held beliefs. And what we've seen throughout the course of the project is that this went from a 7-story zoning down to a 4-story zoning. The density and the amount of units were significantly reduced. Setbacks that were requested were put in place. Buffers that were requested were increased. And we've tried to deal with each of those requests to the best that we can while still responding to the pressures of developing needed housing in this area. While I understand the feeling that the project has kept changing, or there's still not a clear picture, that's precisely because we've responded to those requests, and we've changed the project. We've changed the requests throughout. We started out with a 7-story request that could have been multifamily or assisted living, congregate care, and now we're at a 4-story request with just the assisted living. And so those are two very, very different projects. 150-foot setback causes very different ramifications for what you might see on the building versus when the setback didn't exist, when there was only the transitional, the initial buffer that we proposed. So I just want to emphasize that we are trying to use the existing process of offering conditions and soliciting feedback on those conditions in the timeframes that were allowed under the UDO. And we believe that while we understand that the neighbors might still not support it, that we are trying to respond to the growing pressures of providing housing in the city and mitigating any impacts. And that's why the conditions are what they are.
No.
The comment about, not understanding where we are with the plan is because at zoning, we don't have a full plan, especially when we're reacting this much to these conditions and changing what we may be able to build. That every time we do that, it causes a change in what the grading might be, what you may or may not see. And so it's not as if we have some design product sitting on a shelf that we're just not showing anyone. We're literally making it up as we're trying to respond to these in real time. And I really want to impress upon the committee that this development team has been sincere in that. And we understand if the neighbors have a different opinion or receive that differently. I'm not going to invalidate their opinions, but the development team has tried to be sincere about responding to those. And that's how we came to the conditions we did today. In terms of the meeting with staff, my understanding was that we were to meet with staff to explore options, which we have done. The neighbors have been really good about reaching out to staff independently, and staff's done a great job in responding to all of their comments throughout the case. So we are, of course, always willing to help with those meetings as well. But before the conditions became final and we shared them, we didn't hear back from the citizens before they became final. So it sort of leaves us in a position of trying to react to those concerns that are raised in the timeframe, again, that we're under. In terms of the Philcrest annexation, I think I want to underscore annexation can't really be, we can't require those folks to annex. We can't require those improvements to Philcrest that are not under our control. So we really have done as much as we can with the Philcrest neighbors, and based on the information that they were giving back to us, we've relayed that to the council. In terms of the grading, again, I think that's something that we've tried to react to as the project has changed. We're happy to answer specific questions that are raised to us, and we did that after sharing the renderings with the neighbors between last committee meeting and this committee meeting. But a lot of what we're hearing is a lot of the same things. Will change the conditions, and then there's a response of a lack of understanding. And so I just want to emphasize we are trying to do what is not only just what's required of us at this stage. This is much more design and intense study than is typically had in a zoning case. And so I hope that that's evidence of earnest attempts to try to answer questions and still provide what we're requesting to do, which is building housing that can support seniors in this area of the city in a way that that is reasonable. So we're happy to answer further questions from the committee, but we hope that these significant changes in the conditions from the time the case was filed to today are evidence of us trying to react to those requests that are expressed to us, which is all we can do. And we appreciate the committee's consideration of that.
Okay. I'm going to bring this back to committee now. Where are we? Councilmember Buffkin?
Thank you, Mayor. And first I want to say, Mr. Cox, thanks for taking the time to come visit. Everybody who has, been involved with this, either, planning commission or council members who've gone and visited the site, came away with a very changed impression, having seen the topography and the state of Fillcrest Road. It really is something that can't be appreciated on paper or a screen, as it were. So we've had a good discussion about conditions, and those are set, can't be changed now. I think everybody understands that. We've got the case in front of us. I think that was only half the job that this committee was assigned by the city council. And Mr. Isley spoke to that, and that this is an opportunity for us to take some lessons away. And I think with the help of our staff, the neighbors could identify some of those policy issues that they're interested in talking about. And in the spirit of improving our zoning process, and I'll accept credit or blame, whichever the case may be. I thought that meeting was going to happen between today and our last committee meeting, but it didn't. So I will, I'll work to arrange that. The idea is, can we learn lessons from this case that have broader application? We've talked about some of those issues, the annexation issue, and it's trouble. We can't change state law clearly, but it's troubling to me that in this regime of only voluntary annexations, the city essentially is forced to accept proposals or not annexed property. So, should we be looking at something like what we talked about last month with Durham having a local bill to close some of those donut holes? The question about detail and site layout. There's other cities that require site plans earlier in the zoning process. I think that's another one. And I think the neighbors also have other issues that, with staff's help, I think they could probably articulate in a policy improvement spirit. So I'd like to take this opportunity over the next month before our next meeting to look into those and have a discussion about how we can make our zoning process work better.
So what I would say is the discussion about this making our zoning process work better is separate from the rezoning case. Now, if you want to talk about the rezoning case with the staff and the neighbors, I mean, these are two different things. So if the consensus is to have a meeting with staff about this case with the neighbors, that's one thing. But holding this up while we have a much bigger discussion about annexation, local bills, whatnot, lessons learned, is a different issue. And I'm happy to ask the council if they're okay with us looking at that issue, but it's separate. Yes, Councilmember Buffkin.
I understand your view, Mayor. Respectfully, I don't think that's what the council approved when they sent this case here. And so we're still within the confines of the direction that the council approved. And the discussion really has a lot more meaning in the context of what happened in this case. And that's why it ought to be held here so we can do that work.
If you're asking for it to be held here for a staff meeting, I'm fine with that. But I think I'm going to ask for clarification from the council on the larger issue. So is your motion to hold this then?
Well, I don't want to cut the discussion short if council members Ford or Cox have any comments they say, but I'll make that motion subject to them having any more comments they would like to make.
Okay. Councilmember Cox?
Well, as I understand it, the neighbors and the developer have not met since June. We also know that they have not met with staff. And there remain a lot of concerns, and the two parties are very far apart. And so I think the developer, even though the developer legally can't offer more conditions, although I'm not entirely clear about that. Can they offer more restrictive conditions? No?
they cannot.
Okay, so the only real option that the developer would have at this point would be to submit a different rezoning request. Is that safe to say?
There is a provision in the recent rezoning amendment that can allow them to withdraw without a public hearing. So either a withdrawal or a denial, there would be the 2-year waiting period, which could be waived by council for any reason. So it would be a new rezoning case, either based on because they took it back or you went to council and had a full hearing and denied it.
Well, I'm certainly amenable to waiving a 2-year waiting period if the parties can come to an agreement. And I think it would be worthwhile to keep this in committee to allow the parties to continue to talk to see if that might be an avenue for a way forward. I agree with the neighbors. This is a site that could be developed for higher densities, such as townhouses or cottage courts or smaller apartments. I also agree with the neighbors. I think that the proposed density is too high. And I think there remain issues about traffic safety and the access of this site directly to lead mine without the benefit of any kind of traffic light. The road, as you walk the street, you can see that it's a very busy road, traffic is fast, and it's on a hill, and it's also on a curve, which makes it very difficult to look left or right in order to access the road from the property. So those are significant concerns, and I'm willing to give the applicant more time to work with the neighbors and come up with an alternative development plan. And so that's where I'm at this point in time.
Thank you. I have a clarification. When was the last time that the applicant met with the neighborhood?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's Jamie Schwedler. We met with the neighborhood on June 28th before the conditions became final. We submitted the conditions after that meeting on June 29th to them. We did not hear back from them on the conditions, whether they wanted us to change anything before they became final on July 1st. And our response, I just checked my email, as far as I can tell, the response back from the neighbors was, thank you for these. We'll bring it up with the our internal steering committee, and we will share our concerns in the next committee meeting, which, because y'all didn't have one in July, wasn't until September. So we didn't receive response back on those final conditions until the committee meeting. At that time, it was encouraged that we talk with staff and then talk with the other neighbors on Philcrest, and then go back and come up with the renderings, which we did and shared with them. And they did have some questions on those, which we responded to, but we didn't meet in person.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments before Councilor Buffkin makes his motion?
Mr. Mayor, this is Avi Graywall with Sing Development. Again, after the last meeting, our big takeaways were two big takeaways. And if you'll recall the last meeting at the end, that's what we were trying to figure out what we needed to do in the next month. So the two big takeaways for us was what we explained today, the clarity on the wall height, which, we worked expeditiously to kind of get an updated grades or as accurate as we could and the renderings done, and then sent them out to the neighborhood last week. and then reaching out to the homeowners along Philcrest to see if they want to be annexed. And so, that was what we understood was a request out of this committee that we needed to address those, we needed to address those requests. And then Councilmember Cox had suggested the last meeting that, we need to be kind of voted out of this committee to go back to council. So I'm still a little confused as to what you all are requesting of us to do in the next 30 days. And if there's going to be something new that comes up at that meeting, I guess what's our long-term, how do we get out of this committee? That's really a request from us. Concern from us, for us.
I don't know that there is an answer to that. I think Mr. Cox said earlier, coming back with a new zoning case. But I mean, I would let this run its course, and we will, after Mr. Buffkin makes that motion, we will allow the neighborhood to meet with the staff. And we will hear what happens next at the next committee meeting.
Okay.
That's the motion that's about to be made.
Yeah, because from our perspective, it seems as much as, I understand the neighborhood concern and they're just general issues with a project like of this nature in this location. And it seems, we've tried our hardest to try to accommodate, as Jamie mentioned, and it's addressed as many concerns as we possibly could. Even we've had staff support since very early on in the project. We had support of planning commission. And so we're kind of at this juncture where the neighborhoods, just doesn't seem like they're ever going to get on board. And at least a couple council members on this committee here are aligned with them. And so, I guess, that's just a general comment. So, if you don't have an answer for how we do get out of this committee, then maybe that's something that it's a larger issue that needs to be addressed as well.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Cox, you had your hand raised. Was there anything you wanted to say?
Well, I think you clarified it. What I'm looking for is since they can't offer conditions, is a new zoning case that is a good compromise between the two parties.
Okay, Councilor Buffkin, are you ready to make a motion?
Thank you, Mayor. I move to authorize our staff to meet with the neighbors to discuss the issues that we've talked about today and further move that this case be held over to the committee's October meeting.
Seconded by Councilmember Cox. All in favor? Okay, clerk, that was unanimous. So we will take this up again at our next committee meeting. And I thank everybody for their patience as we move through this process. We will now go on to the next item on our agenda, which is the Cameron Park Neighborhood Conservation Overlay District. I believe we have Justin Ramada here to speak to us about that.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon. Mr. Chavis, can I be given permission to share my screen, please?
Can you also join us via video?
Yeah, sure. Share your screen, Mr. Ramada.
Thank you. I believe my video is up. Can you all see me?
No, we cannot. Oh, now we can. Thank you.
Bear with me one moment while I pull up the presentation. Okay, can everyone see that and hear me and see me okay?
Let me see. I can see the screen, but I can't see you, Justin.
Justin, you can proceed. We can see the slides.
Okay, great. Thanks, Pat. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Good afternoon, Mayor and council members. I've got just a brief overview for you here on this text change authorization request for the Cameron Park NCOD. This is an application that was originally filed back in February of this year. And again, it's proposing changes to an existing neighborhood conservation overlay district. The Cameron Park NCOD was initially established in 2006 and then later modified both in 2010 and 2017. And if you'll recall, this item was brought for authorization to City Council in May of this year and subsequently referred to this committee. This is just some geographical context. For the request, you can see the Cameron Park NCOD is bound roughly by Peace Street to the north, St. Mary's to the east, Oberlin Road to the west, and stretching almost to Hillsborough Street to the south. The applicants are requesting a suite of changes to the NCOD. Those include a reduction in the maximum lot size from over 21,000 square feet down to 10,000 square feet, the introduction of a new minimum lot size of 6,000 square feet, changes to the front yard setback, which would introduce a minimum 20-foot front yard setback, and also a requirement to be within 20% of houses on the average setback along the same block face. Changes to garage entrances requiring the entrance be set back 5 feet as opposed to the existing 10 feet. Requirement for detached garages and accessory dwelling units to be set back at least 4 feet from an alley. It also introduces changes to accessory dwelling unit floor sizes, introducing a 600 square foot max for 1-story structures and a 1,200 square foot max for 2-story structures. Other changes include those to building envelopes for both for principal structures as well as accessory structures and ADUs, and a provision that limits the amount of fill that can be brought in to a site associated with the construction of a new principal dwelling. Staff did point out some potential impacts of this text change in the initial report and in your backup material. Just running through those quickly. Those related to potential housing affordability issues. The introduction of the new minimum lot size would effectively prohibit certain building types, such as townhomes that can be more affordable. Some of the proposed new rate changes could impact, could implement a difficulty for staff to implement and potentially for members of the public to understand, those specifically being those related to the new provisions related to building height. The provision for the limitation on fill being brought into the site also appears to be in conflict with what an NCOD is allowed to change, regulate as part of the NCOD. I did just want to point out that this level of detail and granular regulation, with that level of regulation, that the neighborhood does have the option to request a historic overlay district. Most of Cameron Park is on the National Register, and proposing a local designation would allow them to kind of implement, along with the Historic Development Commission, some of these specific granular detailed regulations.
Could you go over the first piece again about the minimum lot size, please?
Sure. So the request is to implement a new minimum lot size of 6,000 square feet. The majority of Cameron Park is zoned residential 6. And as you know, with the recent missing middle housing text change, townhouses are now allowed in the R6 district at a size of 4,500 square feet minimum per unit. So the addition of this minimum lot size, while wouldn't outright prohibit them, makes it unlikely for anything other than single family detached homes to be constructed.
Thank you.
Sure. So if ultimately authorized, staff would recommend the removal of the provision related to site topography grading. Again, we do not believe it's something that an NCOD has the authority to change under the UDO. We would also recommend a simpler approach to the maximum building height standards, one that would be easier for members of the public to understand, and one that would be easier for staff to implement. Just some procedural context. If ultimately authorized, there would be a neighborhood built environmental characteristics study. Property owners within the NCOD would be notified by mail. There would be neighborhood meeting. But after that, the process would be that of any text change, staff would work to bring the draft forward to the Planning Commission and then ultimately to council for another public hearing, which again would be noticed by mail. At this point, I'm happy to answer any questions. I don't know if the applicants are on the line at this point. I will say that staff did meet, thanks to Councilor Fort, with the applicants last week, and they did express a willingness and interest to make some of the changes that I mentioned earlier. But I'm happy to answer any questions at this time.
Okay, if we could take down the presentation. Thank you. Councilmember Fort, you told me that about the neighborhood meeting. Is there anything you would like to add to that?
Not at this time. I know there's some folks who may have signed up on the call, but at the appropriate time, I make a motion. We did have a very productive conversation on Friday. And so I would like to hold this open to our October meeting so that the neighbors and the staff have opportunity to work through some of the changes that were agreed upon when we met last week.
Okay. Alan, do we have anybody waiting to speak from the neighborhood?
No, ma'am. For this issue, the only individuals, no, we don't have anyone other than Mr. Easley, and I don't think he's here for that purpose, but we can unmute him and see. You are unmuted, Mr. Easley.
No, thank you. Just watching.
So we don't have anyone there.
Okay, thank you very much.
Madam Mayor, this is Pat Young. If I might, just a quick comment. I was in that meeting with Councilman Fort and Justin last week. Just to put a fine point on what Justin said, I think staff's position is that some of the proposed components of these NCOD changes are in either partial or direct opposition to your adopted policy regarding housing access and affordability. Some of the other provisions are not, right? I think some are either neutral or beneficial. Some are in tension or in opposition to that. And as you heard from Councilmember Fort, the neighborhood voluntarily asked to spend some more time with staff to see if they could amend or revise or modify the recommendations to address our concerns. So we stand ready to do that if that's you all's interest and desire.
Okay, thank you very much. Councilmember Fort.
I think Councilmember Buffkin had a question.
Yes, I do for our staff, if I may. This is a little out of order, but so my question, I was looking at the map and I see there's a NCOD Cameron Park core and a transition area. Could staff help me understand the difference between the two districts? I'm not sure I was ever aware of the distinction between the two.
Yeah, if you'll just bear with me 1 minute. The core area is, Councilor Buffkin, where the changes are proposed and where the bulk of the regulations exist. The transition area kind of lays on the outskirts of the core area, and the only standards, I believe, in the transition area are those kind of related to height as you transition out of the NCOD to the adjacent and nearby areas. But all of these proposed changes are in that core area. It is the main area of the NCOD, and it is about a little over 300 parcels.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful.
Any other questions? Okay. Councilmember Fort.
Thank you, Mayor. It is my motion that we hold this open or move it to our October committee meeting to give the staff and the community members at Cameron Park an opportunity to revise and edit some of the conditions that have been submitted as a part of this application for them to have those conversations.
Okay, we have a second. Councilmember Cox is second. All in favor? Okay, clerk, that was unanimous. Thank you. Okay, we have no other items on our meeting agenda today. So with that, I would like to thank the staff and adjourn the meeting. Thank you all. See you soon.